I think in our current society today, we're seeing more people without work, more people having more dramatic things happening in their lives. The world is ever changing. So with that being said, I think the House of Hope is a very important piece of the puzzle when people are trying to change their lives and make good decisions.
First House of Hope was opened in 1971 on 119 Fulton Street in Mankato.
Well, 40 years ago, which is how old the House of Hope is, I was sober 3 years. Joe McDonough was similar, and Art Cooney was the other guy that, and we were doing a lot of sponsoring then because it was early in our program and we were rambunctious and we wanted to sober up the world, and so we spent a lot of time sponsoring people. And it dawned on us that there are people who, when they came out of treatment, literally had nowhere to go. And that bothered us. And about that same time, Joe McDonough was moving into a new house and moving out of that house on Fulton Street where the House of Hope started. And we got to thinking about maybe that house would make a nice halfway house for alcoholics, because there just literally was not much then, nowhere to go.
I got to know the two chemical dependency counselors, Joe McDonough and Bob Cooney, and they decided we needed a halfway house in Mankato. So they got together, and Joe happened to have a house available. So my Aunt Dorothy and I helped them with all the paperwork to receive monies from the state and federal government. They called it grant and aid back then, in order to, open it, get incorporated. So I would help her. The office for House of Hope was at her home on Hickory Street. So I would go there and help her collate and whatever, things I could do.
It would be right near the beginning there. It really impressed me that Joe McDonough would give up his house to have this halfway house come in there.
That it gave the people who were just leaving the treatment centers a place to go that was more home-like and a bridge between their treatment and their rejoining their family and their community. They had the help of a number of people who would come to the house and lecture. They especially appreciated a couple lovely ladies who were very helpful in the kitchen and around the home to make it more home-like and to make the clients there feel at home. It was a setting where the families of the clients could be brought in for visits and to become more adjusted to their return to family life.
When it first started, it was much like a family in there. We had a cook that was just a wonderful gal, and we would have meetings with the clients, and it was great. It was a lot of fun, and a lot of good things were happening. They really were. So I feel good about the whole thing. I really do. I'm glad that I was there at that time.
And just seeing it evolve from being a dream of these two counselors to actually opening and start helping people. I know people from back in the early 70s that graduated from the program and are still come around, and thank us, and it's very gratifying.
Through the years, their home was the House of Hope, their Mankato home. And then as that became more crowded, the home next to it became the expansion for the House of Hope.
I started my position as secretary in 1977, was replacing my Aunt Dorothy in that position. And we moved the office from her home to Fulton Street, where the House of Hope was.
The purchase of the second house at 121 Fulton became available in 1988. I was hired as director in 1982, and the House of Hope was established in 1971. It was incorporated as a nonprofit in 1972. After I'd been there a few years, we were struggling with finding enough beds for the requests we were getting, so the house next door at 121 Fulton came available, and I wrote a grant from the state of Minnesota to buy that house and rehabilitate it. And that happened in 1988 approximately. After that, we had 17 beds total.
It had an excellent reputation in the community. There was just, no complications that for the law enforcement. I mean, nothing unusual anyway. And I think they were good neighbors to people. We didn't get complaints. So I would say it was remarkably successful. Not an isolated place at all. It was right across from a junior high school.
As the years progressed, we kept having more requests than we had bed space. And as we grew, we had to increase staff, and then we lost office space because we didn't have very much to begin with. So it was crowded, and we needed to do something. And we opened the new building. Construction was completed. All the inspectors signed off on everything in around June of 2001. I looked at many, many buildings that were available in the Mankato area and went through them, and I had an engineer go through one, and at the last one that the engineer went through, he said, you know, what you have to do is talk to your board of directors and have them consider scrapping, going into an older building, existing building, and trying to rehab it to your specs. It would be better if you could figure out a way to build new from the beginning up to your specifications, what would serve your needs. And so that was the, over the years then between 89, 90, and 99 is we were exploring ways to raise money and find land and consider building a new building because we had no assets. We had just the two existing houses that we owned, and I think maybe we owed a little money on those, but at some point they were paid off, and so we had that equity to put down on the new building. I started writing grants in the late 90s to start getting money, donors built up to purchase property and to begin starting the new building. I became acquainted with an architect and a grant writer that had helped the Fairmont Juvenile Detention Center get built. And I was talking to them at a meeting one day, and I said, well, we're considering building a new building for the halfway house, House of Hope. The architect and the grant writer said, well, if you want a building, we can raise the money. So that caught my ear, and with grants, you have to have your ducks in a row. The first thing we needed to do was take a risk and buy property. So we had to find property. I finally found the existing location where we did build in 2000, 2001, and we made an offer on it, and that was a little scary because here we were buying land, didn't know if we could build or get the money to build a building, and then we were going to be paying for a piece of land.
I came on board in early 2000, and I was in another position and decided, you know, that the House of Hope was going to go forward, and this raising money can be a very tricky deal. Now, Larry, the director at that time, already had USDA, Minnesota Housing Finance, Federal Home Loan Bank Board, had those sources of funds all lined up and ready to go. But what you need with those sources of funds are you need matching from other areas, you know, from the community, from other foundations. When Larry suggested that the House of Hope needed somebody to raise that other, about $400,000, I said, well, gosh, maybe that could be interesting. There had been some groundwork laid with people in the community. So there were a number of people, thank heavens for them, who, when we asked, or when I asked if they would sit on the fundraising committee, I recruited about 20 movers and shakers from the community. Then we, the committee, started visiting. We sat down and we said, okay, what 20 people could you contact in the community? And we talked about the fact, you know what, we can't do this asking for $20. We have to do this asking for 1,000 or 5,000, if they will, or whatever they feel they can do. And they took that challenge on. I was very pleased. They took it on. We got contributions, small and large, and all were welcome. Everything counts. From more than 500 foundations, individuals, families, businesses came through big time, and raised that additional 400 or so thousand in the summer of 2000. We needed to either have that amount of dollars pledged, the 400,000 approximately. We had to have that pledged, or we had to have that in hand coming by the end of the year. And in the meantime, of course, taxpayer funding was funding the guys, the clients. And this last year in the state of Minnesota brought back all those bad memories, because you may not remember, but Jesse Ventura was in a fight with the everybody was fighting, they were all fighting. And he was threatening to shut down the state. And if he had shut down the state, there was no money to pay for the client. That would stop. And we had no reserves. But Larry had talked about the money problems. I mean, we were in debt. We had lines of credit. And you can't do that for long. So I said to one gentleman, I said, you know what? So here's what we need. We need $36,000 now in a check or pledged to trigger the other dollars, the USDA, the Federal Home Loan Bank Board, the Minnesota Housing Finance. We needed $36,000 to cover the gap, and we had hit everybody, and the committee had hit everybody. We didn't know where. So I said to him, do you think you could go to, and it was a friend of his and a well-to-do person in town, who to that point hadn't contributed anything. I said, what do you think? Do you think you could go to him and ask for that amount of money? And he said, yeah. So I was sitting at my desk, and here comes this gentleman. Knocks at the door. I opened the door, and he said, here you are. And it was a check for $36,000. And I started to cry, like now. And I said, do you know what this means? And he said, yeah, I think so. He was, I think, shook up. And I said, yeah, okay, we got it now. And so then we started to make the calls that now we could move on the project.
When we left our old neighborhood, there were neighbors that did not want to see us leave. They were sad that we were selling and moving out. The new neighborhood, as with the conditional use permit from the city, they had to get permission from something like 300 feet surrounding our location. And there was very little objection to us coming in. During the construction phase of the new building in 2000, latter 2000, until it was completed, it was a real miserable winter. It was tough on the contractors. They had to have extra heat in the building just to keep comfortable for the workers. I was out there nearly every day. I would have a meeting in the morning with the superintendent and discuss various things. They would call me. I would have to make changes, possibly as the construction went on. It was a very challenging time because, okay, we had money raised and yet you didn't want to go over. I don't think we went over budget too bad, but change orders take time and cost money. Once the building was finished, then we had numerous people that needed to sign off. The fire marshal, the city building inspector, we had to get approval for housing lives, in a sense, like a hotel. We had to have certain rules and restrictions, corridors, fire escapes, things like that. Finally got all of the people to sign off. So here's our staff down in the old houses, small, streamlined staff, and we thought, all of us thought, well, we're going to go from this building, we're all going to go down here in this new building and operate the same way. Well, that lasted about 5 minutes.
There was 3 staff when I started, then there were 4 for many, many years, and now there's usually 30.
The women's program finally was licensed and able to be operated as a women's halfway house chemical dependency treatment program in 2006.
I've done a lot of research on the history of House of Hope, and it's amazing to me how they've grown over the years, over the past 40 years, going from this small, tiny little house on Fulton Street to 2 houses to building the new facility on 3rd Avenue to house 29 men, then purchasing a sober house next door, so we reached out to another 5 men, and then opening the women's facility where we can house 7 women.
We rented a house from the VID organization, which is just up the street, a block and a half from the House of Hope location now on 3rd Avenue. And we needed a place for guys that had completed the program but still needed a little extra supervision, possibly, and just a safe place to live. So I rented that house from VID, and so we had guys in there for a while, called it a sober house. And then the program, as I said, more and more requests for women were coming in, and we had no way of dealing with that. So one day one of my staff, Pat I believe it was, said, why don't we open up our own women's program? And that is, then we started looking at that Vine House and got all kinds of people in there to inspect it to see if it was going to be possible. Got the state to license it, and I believe it's licensed for 7 beds if I'm not mistaken, and we have room for 1 office. It's quite compact, but it does serve the needs. And that was a good move for us, because then we could help the people that were requiring assistance in the women's area. We don't take children, didn't take children at that time. We didn't have accommodations for that. There's another program in the area anyway that does that. So it was just strictly a halfway house, which now has evolved into a treatment center for chemical dependency. In 2007, we purchased the house that joined our property and opened the Oasis. The property where the current Oasis is was becoming available. I don't know if I went over there and asked them if they wanted to sell or how we found out about it, but and that is location, location, location. That property connected to ours, and if we missed it, it would be gone. We'd probably never get an opportunity again. So we decided to purchase that house and make that a sober house. I don't know if that's when I named it the Oasis or whatever, but I always thought of an oasis, this sanctuary in the desert where you can get your needs met, and that's how the word came to me.
We opened the Oasis, we purchased a house, and this is the stories that I've heard, is that there was a gentleman there who was a client, an alumni member, who lived at the Oasis and helped us by remodeling the house, top to bottom. He did amazing work. I've seen some of the before and after pictures, and it was phenomenal, his carpentry skills and what an eye for detail that he had. He did so much work there for us, just to help give back to the House of Hope.
I had a client in at the time, had gone through the program and was an excellent handyman, did some carpenter work for us, and I gave him a challenge. He had a little bit of a legal problem, and I wrote a letter to the judge saying, I've got a plan for this guy. He's been through treatment many times. I said he needs supervision, and I'm going to hire him to rehab this house for us. And this person took that project on and completely remodeled that house by himself. And he was the type of guy that didn't like to ask for help, but he was good. And he resided it, he shingled it, we did interior work. He did an excellent job.
After he moved out of the House of Hope, he began doing our maintenance at the House of Hope. When I came on staff in 2009, Larry was our maintenance contract worker. He was always available, and again, as I said, an eye for detail, very meticulous in his carpentry and his repair skills. Unfortunately, we lost Larry in last summer, so that would have been in June of 2010. We lost him suddenly, which was very sad for all of us. As I've said many times, we are a family and we all took it very hard. The board of directors and myself, we discussed it, and for all of his gifts to the House of Hope, through his skills, we chose to rename the Oasis to the LB Oasis. Larry's family asked that we not use his whole name because Larry would not have wanted that. It was the AA Alcoholics Anonymous. He was not a proud man. He was not one that was looking for glory in anything. And so we chose to use the LB Oasis. It stands as that now. There is a monument out in the front yard. It's a beautifully handcrafted wooden bench with his initials on it. And I encourage anybody to go by and see it. And I will give thanks right here to Larry Norland for building that bench and giving it to the House of Hope, which showed his own carpentry skills and his eye for detail. So I just want us to all take a moment and remember Larry and everything that he gave to the House of Hope.
I decided to retire at the end of 2008, so I gave my 6 months notice and retired in June of 2009.
There were times when we really didn't think we'd stay open because of funding, and I went through all those times. There was many. And then to see us all of a sudden be able to grow and spread, you know, where it's needed. I mean, there's not that many facilities like ours in Minnesota.
For my 27 years with the organization, I had fought for higher per diems because we were lower than others in the state, and money was always tight. My recommendation at the time, at the end of 2008, was if we don't get more money in as paid for our services, we may as well think about looking at closing the doors. Unbelievably, things changed right at the end of 2008, December of 2008. And so we then switched to more of a treatment program, different levels, intensive treatment, moderate treatment. And so we had a couple different scenarios as far as billing for our services. And all of a sudden, we were going to be able to make ends meet. And well, I call it my epiphany. I had an epiphany sometime around Christmas. My vacation, I was off a few days around Christmas, and I thought, you know what? I'm ready to retire. This is a good time to retire because the per diem situation has been figured out. And talked to my wife, and I had to get permission from her, and she said, yeah, why don't you go for it? So I gave 6 months notice. Actually, the reason, one of the board members said, why'd you pick the June 12th for? And I said, well, you know, and why not the end? I said, well, 27 years ago to the date is when I started. So that was the end of my full 27 years.
I'm Nancy Mason. I'm the Executive Director at House of Hope. I've been with the House since October of 2009, and I was brought out here following Larry Norland's retirement, which were some very big shoes to fill. I was working as a drug and alcohol counselor and as a clinical supervisor for a treatment facility in Oregon. When I got here, I looked at the numbers of people that we were serving and looked at what was out there in the community, and we were turning a lot of people away because we didn't have bed space available. There were people on our waiting list that were on there for weeks, maybe months at a time. And I said, we need to start looking at where is House of Hope going to go. Do we want to stay where we're at and continue to do the wonderful job we're doing, or do we want to grow and reach out and help more people? So myself and the board of directors had a strategic planning meeting.
So we recognize that we need to go into the community to educate people as to what this means, what happens when addiction takes over our lives.
We've started up an outreach program now where we go into, right now we're doing it through area churches and stuff, where we talk to 7th, 8th, and 9th graders about peer pressures and making good choices. While we're meeting with the kids, we bring the parents into another room and we discuss with them, here's the warning signs, here's the things you need to talk to your kids about. I was invited to go talk to the high schools, and so I got to go talk to one of the high schools, and I was sitting in class and we kind of do our story, and it's a short version and stuff like that, and did it and don't think too much about it. And then it was probably 3 months, 4 months later, I'm going through the line at Sam's Club, and I get up to the checkout, and this young girl sitting there, and she's like, Mark. And I looked at her and I'm thinking, all right, whose daughter is it? And then I gave her my card. She didn't even have my card to read it off of to say, oh, Mark, you know. And she's like, well, you came and spoke at my school and I got to listen to what you said. And I said, oh, wow. And she goes, yeah, you made me cry. And I thought, well, I of course apologized. I said, well, that wasn't my intent to make you cry. She goes, no, it was great. Thank you. That was good. My friends and I, we talked about that afterwards and stuff like that. So that right there taught me that it's important to tell the story. Yeah, don't sugarcoat it, but you don't have to be blunt either, but you can get enough out there that it makes people go, huh, maybe I should think about what I'm doing in my life.
2011, this year, a building has been purchased in Fairmont to expand services down there.
I have been involved with, of course, for 6 years with House of Hope, and at that time, when I first got involved, they knew that this facility was limited. I mean, they had only so many beds, and they looked at the possibility of expanding and going up, higher, or out, but that seemed like a significant expense. So we kind of were looking at some possibilities, exploring it, and then of course the big part of the time was transition with Larry retiring, and then our seeking a new director, and that took quite a bit of energy and time. But then came, once that was established, once Nancy arrived, and we began to think about where is it that we want to go, what is it that we want to do. We had retreat time to explore our values, explore our mission, what we hope to accomplish. And then it was Nancy who reported to us that this Fairmont property came on the scene.
We needed to expand. We needed to have more beds, especially for women in the community and in the area in southern Minnesota. So we started looking for properties. We had a couple of options that were out there. And last July, this facility in Fairmont miraculously landed in our lap, and it was built for us. And I saw the vision, what could be there and what we could do. And I've been pushing since July to let's get this moving. This building has been sitting empty for 10 years. It was built as a treatment facility. It has everything we need. So the board of directors and myself have been working very hard, very diligently in getting this done. We're in the closing settlements of it now. And it's such an exciting time for me to be part of this. I really want to see the House of Hope grow into a regional treatment center.
The impact that House of Hope has on a community, a facility like this, on the community is very powerful, because just the very presence of it says that we're addressing an issue or concern in our society that needs to be addressed. Now we're going to be closing very soon on this property, which is very exciting. To think that we're going to expand our ability to help people rebuild their lives.
In all my years in working in chemical dependency and my years in personal recovery, I have yet to meet a person that has not been touched by addiction in some way, shape, or form. Either themselves, a family member, a coworker, a friend. There's always somebody in somebody's life that suffers from this disease.
The first 40 years of the House of Hope have been exciting. The need is there. And through blood, sweat, and tears, the House of Hope has grown and prospered to fulfill the needs of the community. What will the next 40 years bring? That's the story that will be written by you.